12 years old, I was already riddled with PTSD and severe anxiety. Seeing a therapist twice a week did nothing to stop my extreme paranoia that someone was following me home from high school, that someone may be watching me in my bedroom, and that someone may be trying to take me from my front yard. My mom raised 3 children by herself. My older brother was in high school and my younger brother in elementary, and I walked 3 blocks to the middle school just down the street from our house. Always the safe rather than sorry type of parent, my mom insisted that I walk with 2 other girls who lived on my street. As middle schoolers often do, we meandered on the way to school and cut through yards and parking lots to spend the most time gossiping. We often split through a church's parking lot if we were in a hurry. Usually, thrush with cars in the morning and afternoon from the preschool in the back. It wasn't unusual to see the same cars every day on our way to school and again on our way back. The other girls thought nothing of it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched on our trek home. In the winter months of my 7th grade year, we used our shortcut every day. The preschool were shut for renovations, so the icy parking lot was empty and perfect for throwing snowballs or sliding on patches of ice. Only a few cars regularly lingered in front of the building, except one white pickup truck that was parked in the back. Every time I saw it, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Every morning and afternoon, a man would be sitting in the driver's seat of the truck, looking out the window, watching us walk. I told my mother the first time I saw him. Knowing I was prone to panic, she brushed it off and told me that he must work at the church. The second time I brought it up, she gave me a pink canister of pepper spray and told me to use it first and apologize later. I gripped it in my cold hand every day after that when we passed the man in his truck. I described him to my mother in detail. A few weeks after we saw the truck for the first time, we crossed the lot after school and found it empty. I breathed the fresh air, putting my pepper spray in my bag and kicking up powdery snow out of relief. That joy died when I turned down my street and saw the truck parked in a driveway just 5 houses down from mine. I sprinted home, locked the door behind me, and counted the minutes until my mother would come home from work. When she finally did, I berated her with questions. Who was that man? Did he live there? What did she know? But my mom's answers were short and nondescriptive. As a single mother, she didn't mingle much with the neighbors and seldom had time to inquire about who lived there. She did know that couple who owned the house where the pickup sat had a deranged son who had been sent to a mental hospital after an incident when he was 14. I was filled with fear. I closed the curtains to my window before the sun had even set that night, and before I went to bed, I locked every window and door in the house. I was convinced that this insane man who watched me walk to school was going to kill me. When I finally did fall asleep that night, I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of our doorbell being pressed repeatedly, almost as if someone was leaning on it. I looked across the hall and my mother was standing in her doorway, face white as a sheet. I scampered across the hall and held my little brother tightly as my mom went to the door. Without opening it, she shouted, "Who are you? And what do you want?" There was no reply, only the sound of the doorbell. Through the peephole, we saw the man who drove the truck parked 5 houses down. She shouted, "I'm calling the police!" as she dialed 911 on her phone. The ringing stopped and was shortly replaced by banging, as if the man was trying to break the door down. Red and blue lights flooded our street and the man ran off through the streets. The police didn't chase him. Instead, parking in our driveway. They asked my mother if she told him to go away, and panicked and crying, she told them she hadn't, and they said there was nothing they could do. She asked to file a restraining order, but they said there was no way to know for sure it was the man down the street. I told them the license number of the truck that was parked in the church's lot, and that the man who drove it was the same man my mom saw ringing our bell. The police wrote it down, but didn't seem interested. After about 20 minutes of asking questions, they left and advised that we lock our doors. My mother Googled the last name of the couple down the street and found out that their son had been discharged at the same time that the truck started showing up in the parking lot. He had been arrested for raping two 12-year-old girls when he was 14 years old, and it was determined that he suffered from a mental disability. He was sentenced to serve 30 years in a mental hospital and then be put on parole. We moved. To this day, I am still convinced that he was trying to kidnap me that night. So, let's not meet again.
This happened to my dad and I on a camping trip back in 2015. I'm 23 now, but this experience is one that will forever scar me for life. Growing up, I lived in a very rural area in Idaho. The news media and the people who lived in my town were ultra-conservative, and pretty much just about everyone around town owned a gun. Being so young, I didn't really understand why, but as I got older, I was learning how to shoot and how to use a gun properly. To the east of my town, there are huge mountains that stretch across the state and go on for miles. As a kid who loved the outdoors, my dad would occasionally take me there to go hunting and fishing once in a while. A few years ago, my dad and I had gone over there to go on a camping/hunting trip so that I could experience a bigger picture of survival and such. When we get there, we pitch our tent and start hiking a few miles into the woods to see if we can try and find anything. Even though I liked the outdoors, I wasn't too big on the idea of killing an animal, as I didn't see a point in the sport. My dad had managed to hunt a rabbit for dinner, and we brought it back to the campsite, and my dad turned that rabbit into a damn good stew. It wasn't what we were hoping to get, but it was certainly better than nothing. After we had ate, my dad had recommended that I go to sleep, as we would have a long day tomorrow with more hunting. Being a kid that goes to bed way too late, I for some reason took my dad's advice and gone to bed while my dad stayed carving a few pieces of firewood to use with his pocket knife. Needless to say, I probably fell asleep for a good hour or so before I woke up to hear my dad unzip the tent and go to bed beside me. The light from the fire was still giving off a really bright glow on the tent, and so I tapped my dad's shoulder and asked him to put it out. However, he must have been dead asleep because he didn't bother responding to my question. Not even 5 seconds later, my dad comes towards the tent, unzips it, and asks what I need from outside. The very second my dad opens the tent, his eyes became wide, filled with fear. He ever so slowly puts his fingers to his lips and tells me to be quiet. It only took me a few seconds to realize what was going on. I slowly turned my head to my left and see a man I had never seen before giving me a wicked smile. His hair was long and messy and his teeth were cracked. At that point, I screamed at the top of my lungs and I saw this man bolt up and run outside the tent, disappearing back into the woods. My dad tried shooting at him, but missed terribly due to how dark it was. We left our tent there and hopped into the truck driving to the police station. We explained everything to the police. but they couldn't really do anything as we had very little information. We went back to go get our stuff, and we thankfully never saw that man again. And that's why I will never be going camping again.
I got some Dunkin' Donuts this morning, and it brought this story back to mind, so I figured I'd share it here. During high school and college, I worked at Dunkin' Donuts for about 7 years and bounced around to a few different locations. I was used to working at the Dunkin' Donuts in my town, where we would get the yeast drinks delivered periodically and frost them ourselves as needed. I transferred to a new shop about a half hour from my house with all the same responsibilities except for the donuts. They were delivered by corporate, and they arrived frosted almost perfectly. They looked like the plastic donuts they show in commercials, always round and not squished together, and they would dip them in frosting so it was evenly spread and neat. It was a busy Saturday morning and was close to Valentine's Day, so we had a fresh order of brownie batter donuts delivered that morning. We were slammed, which was normal for a weekend, so it wasn't out of the ordinary to see my manager, who I'll call Jeremy, running around stressed out. When he first ran past me, I didn't think anything of it, and I continued making sandwiches at the sandwich station. He rushed by carrying a pastry tray, and I watched him begin frantically throwing something in the trash, looking worried as hell. At first I laughed and just said, "Jeremy, what the heck are you doing?" He straightened out and looked absolutely beside himself. I had never seen Jeremy look so lost, so I asked what was going on and if something was wrong. Someone filled the brownie batter donuts with staples. He told me he got a phone call from the corporate that one of the stores in our chain, which contained 10, had somehow discovered multiple staples in every donut in their order. That was at least 48 donuts from our store and more or less for the other 9, depending on their sales too. They told Jeremy that we had to get rid of the most recent delivery because whoever put the batter in the filler dumped a ton of staples in it as well. Thankfully, we hadn't sold all of the previous orders yet from that morning because it was still relatively early, but the more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was going to be sick. What if a young child had gotten one of them? I pictured some family sitting at home on a Saturday morning, going out to get some drinks and donuts for the kids, and imagined everything else that could have happened after. I never found out what came of it, and as far as I know, neither did my boss. I'm assuming nothing happened because I thankfully never heard anything on the news. Makes me wonder if they covered it up, and I hope they were able to find out who the asshole was who did it. So, Dunkin' Donuts terrorist, let's not meet, and I hope somehow you're rotting away somewhere. Finally, I've mustered up the will to share this experience with you all. I'd posted about it the day it happened on a travel sub, hoping for a bit of consolation from the internet strangers, and was met with rather callous individuals, which made the incident harder to overcome. But now, I feel ready. Perhaps some of you will have insight because I'm still flabbergasted by what happened. Anyway, here goes. About a year ago, I decided to make an impromptu journey to Poland in search of relatives I'd never met but had only heard of via my ancestry research, and also an American cousin who reached out to me. As a lover of travel and languages, I was eager to go alone and see how I'd do. I learned some Polish in college and have been traveling worldwide since I was 21. Before going to the rural southeast of Poland, I made the most of the trip by first exploring Krakow, which was an amazing city. With buses and trains being the prominent mode of intercity transport, I lugged my suitcase the 40 minutes to the vast station to buy me a bus ticket to my next stop, my ancestral homeland. Now, being a country girl growing up, I'm still learning how to be adept at public transport and maneuvering people and streets. I'm also shy and not great at social skills, but normally that doesn't stop me. The main bus or train station at Krakow is also a large fancy mall, and I was delighted to find a Mac cafe with free Wi-Fi. My phone service does not extend to Europe, so that's all the contact I had. I settled in and messaged a friend back home as to my whereabouts. The Mac cafe had the aura of a Starbucks, but the cheap prices of McDonald's, which is another plus. It was relatively busy and open to the public view where I was, sitting at a one-person sized booth next to an outlet to charge up my phone before the long journey. However, my sanctity was not to last. After a short time, an older, gruff-looking gentleman with a thick, tattered winter coat sauntered in and immediately headed my way. He seemed to be some kind of construction worker, as his coat was very warmly padded and dirty, with the characteristic reflective yellow and orange colors. It did strike me as a bit strange, since the station or mall was more travelers and shoppers than blue-collar workers. As for him heading my way, I figured, with the laptop he held out ahead of him, that he was looking for a plug as I had been. Of course, mine wasn't the only outlet amid the moderately spacious cafe, but he chose to sit directly next to me, almost touching shoulders, and plugged into the second of the two plugs that I was using. Sometimes, people don't have a sense of personal space, I guess, and this outlet was the closest to the entrance. I shook it off. He proceeded to speak to me and gesture at his laptop. I got the sense that he needed some technical assistance from me and figured that would explain why he sat right next to me. I helped him set up the Wi-Fi on his laptop in broken Polish, and he thanked me by kissing my hand empathetically and smiling like he'd won the lottery. I noticed an icon at the bottom of his screen showing he had a Ukrainian keyboard equipped, and it confirmed what I thought I heard earlier of his accent. He kept looking my way even after he no longer needed assistance, and I pretended to be busy on my phone even though my friend on the other end wasn't necessarily responding so quickly. I didn't really want him to talk to me. He kept his laptop slightly turned my way, intentionally, as if he wanted me to see what he was doing. He opened up Facebook and started a FaceTime call with a woman around his age, or perhaps a bit younger. He pointed the camera towards me to show her and said something I couldn't understand well enough. I assumed he was telling her how I'd help him out. But their conversation seemed strained, and she made a forced smile at me briefly before they began talking loudly at each other again. I tried to mind my own business, but it was awkward being in view of his FaceTime call, and it being so loud that others in the cafe looked over at him. The call ended soon thereafter, and I thought he would leave. Instead, he closed his laptop and proceeded to question me. I tried my best to answer in broken Polish, mixed with English, and he seemed to understand well enough. He was amicable, although dramatic. Every time I finally understood something he said and answered him satisfactorily, he would laugh and kiss my hand and not let go. Now, before venturing to Poland, my cousin had warned me that the rural old-fashioned men may kiss a lady's hand in greeting. With this in the back of my mind, I wasn't sure if he was in the realm of cultural normality for the region, or if it was too much. Being the socially awkward person that I am, I decided to let it go, especially considering I'd been traveling alone for 2 weeks at that point. I suppose some human-to-human interaction would not be totally unwelcome. However, his questions, despite the friendly smile he posed them with, were increasingly invasive. Since he seemed, again, to not be one for respecting space, I chalked it up to him being too friendly but innocent enough. He asked why I'm here, where I'm from and going to, what's my phone number, so if I need something later in my travels, he can return the favor I lent to him. That one set me off. Even if he's ignorant to social norms and space, that one was odd to me, even for an old-fashioned man. I didn't mind obliging him though, because my number would be useless in Europe anyways, and I gave him an alias instead of my real name. During this conversation, he kept saying I need not leave yet for my bus. It morphed later into I didn't need to go on the bus at all, that I could stay a while with his family, and he insisted he would like to repay me for my help. Well, all I did was click McCafe free Wi-Fi and accept the terms. It didn't seem like much to warrant this much gratitude, but who knows with boomers, right? But he used FaceTime just fine. My thoughts were fluttering around my head. I kept declining and said my family would be waiting for me, which was a lie. We'd never met and they didn't even know of my existence yet, but he said for me to just tell them I'll come later and to stay with him and his family instead. He also insisted on buying me coffee, even though I hadn't finished the one I bought myself yet, and caused a fuss when I kept saying no. Mind you, this whole time, he's still leaning towards me and holding onto my hand tightly. It was getting sweaty. Because of it, it was hard for me to try to collect my things and leave, or even shoot a message to my friend, like, what do I do? He called to a cashier at the counter about 10 feet away and asked for him to bring me a coffee. The cashier replied that the man may walk up to the register and place his order, but the man refused twice. His friendly demeanor when speaking to me was gone, and he nearly yelled at the cashier to meet his demands and threw the cash onto the table for him. The man turned back to me and was smiley again and insisted that I stay to drink coffee with him and chat. He knew when my bus was leaving and where to. He knew because he looked over my shoulder at my ticket when it was resting on the table next to my phone. I had it out to memorize the pickup location and time. And again, my hand held hostage in his. I hadn't a chance to move the ticket out of sight. He was blatantly stalling me and still insisting on me going with him to see his family. I finally got upset, not wanting to miss the bus and waste money on that ticket. Plus, I had a ride waiting for me, expecting me to arrive at a particular time, and in my limited Polish, I told him just so. The people-pleaser in me was torn, but ultimately, the hostess who would be awaiting me had won out over the man glued to my side. Somehow, he finally let up and nodded sadly when I said that I must leave now. I gulped the burning hot coffee he bought, just for show, to not look ungrateful or wasteful, and thanked him for buying it for me. He refused my thanks profusely and insisted he owed it to me, and he still had hold of my hand. He kissed my hand again and again, holding it like the lowly servant does in the cartoons to the lovely princess that they're indebted to. I put up with it once more, with the hope that it would be over soon. He pulled me closer as he did this and reached around my shoulders like he wanted to hug me goodbye. I put up with this too, despite all his rude insistence. I still felt like he was an over-friendly, perhaps lonely man, and felt bad just walking away. His sudden jerk of my arm closer to him slid me along the booth closer to him, and he hugged me tightly. Then, he kissed my cheeks. Ugh! But when I thought he was letting go, he grabbed my face forcefully with both hands and turned it towards his, and he kissed me on the lips twice, desirously, as if he were a Casanova movie star and I his femme fatale. It was disgusting, and he did it in full view of the other customers sitting across the way. They'd thrown awkward glances our way throughout the entire encounter, since we were the only ones talking and laughing in the cafe. They especially had noticed his loud demands to the cashier. I was too much in shock to notice if they'd seen the last part, and I didn't care. I had 5 minutes to reach the bus amid a huge, bustling station that I'd never been to before. And as soon as the stupid old man let go, I made an obligatory forced half smile and a goodbye and escaped on shaky legs into the crowded walkway. I knew I'd missed the bus, but I had to leave the cafe anyway to escape. The next bus wasn't for 6 more hours, and the man was probably still there, just inside the mall area. And I didn't want him to spot me again. I waited at a different fast food place closest to the buses and inside of a police officer standing at the mall entrance, just in case I saw the man again. Being in a different time zone from my family and friends, I felt I had no one to comfort me and made the mistake of frantically posting to Reddit in another sub. I got yelled at by the mall security guy for resting my shaking feet on the bar of the chair beside me, and I broke into tears. I only told my night owl friend from earlier about this when she came online later. And as I didn't want to worry my parents or boyfriend about me traveling alone, to this day, they don't know what happened. Who knows what he was really up to? Or maybe he really did want me to meet his family. I'll never know. I felt so gross and disgusting physically that I covered my mouth and tongue with a hand sanitizer that I had with me. This was February 2020, but coronavirus had yet to be confirmed in Poland. Mentally and emotionally, I was exhausted and distraught, of course, because I mostly felt stupid for letting things get that far. So, when all's said and done, Mr. Scruffy Old Ukrainian Man, let's never meet again. This story happened to me 5 years ago in 2014. I was 12 years old and my school was pretty far away, so I had to wake up early before everyone to take the bus. This detail will have this matter later. So, I just moved to a new house in a small town in Canada with my family, and at that time, I was friends with most of my children's neighbors, and we used to hang out in the streets and play games in our driveways. It was safe for us to do that because no cars ever passed by our street except for the people who lived in the street, and all our houses were close to one another so our parents could watch us. Anyway, so weeks passed by and I always felt a bit weird since I moved to this new house, but I didn't think much of it until one night. So me and my friends were playing vampire. You know, the game where the vampire chases the human and tries to kill everyone. And then, this black car passed by but really slowly. It was a mix between the size of a van but the look of a fancy car. The windows were tinted black so we couldn't see who was the driver. The car passed by and we continued playing. But suddenly, the car makes a U-turn and passes next to us again slowly. Me and my friends got scared, so we all ran into my driveway to tell my dad. By the time he got there, the car was gone, and since we were young, my dad thought we were kidding and didn't think much of it. So the weekend passed by and we are now Monday. I had school that day, so I woke up really early, around 5 a.m. as usual, and went downstairs. It was still dark outside, so I had to turn on the lights in my house. I prepared my cereal bowl and sat at the dining table to eat until I looked outside my window and see the same black van that I saw the other day. I panicked and I run upstairs in my room and look by the window. The car is doing a round trip in the street. I didn't want to wake up my family, so I just waited for the car to go away. And I knew he was looking for me because I was the only house with lights on at this time of day. The next morning, I prepared my bowl of cereal, grabbed a knife with me, sat to eat, looked through the window, and saw the same van once again. I didn't run upstairs because at this point, I was getting used to it and I was armed, so I just closed the light and waited for the car to go away. But after a few minutes, I hear knocking at my door. The car was parked in my driveway and a tall man was standing in front of my door and knocking. At this point, I was shaking, crying, and I almost shit myself. I was ready to die. But surprisingly, the man gave up and went away after 1 minute. For a year, that car still passed in my street every morning, and I never knew who that man was and what he wanted from me. He now stopped coming, but we sometimes get called by someone we don't know, and there's no answer when we say, "Hello? Who is this?" So, strange tall man in the van, let's not meet. This took place back in 2016. I, at that time, was a 16-year-old girl at a summer camp. This summer camp took place at a college about 45 minutes away from me. I was there for filmmaking and knew everyone in the program. Yes, there were other programs such as dance, drama, and visual arts, but there was still a limited amount of people. The film camp lasted longer than all the other ones, so by the last week, there were about 50 of us on campus. So, you remember faces. There was a certain spot on campus where a lot of people would go to watch the sunset. 2 of my friends and I decided to sit out there. There were many people to begin with, so we felt comfortable. I should have mentioned this earlier, but the campus is located in the sketchier part of town, and there are gates to enter from the outside. As it got darker and darker, more and more people went back to their dorms. The 3 of us stayed out even in the dark. There were street lamps and I had my camera, and one friend has her laptop, so it wasn't pitch black. It was about 9:30 p.m., and a man walked in front of us. We waved and smiled as he walked by. The only thing is, I have never seen him before. Even a week ago, before all of the other sessions left, I had never seen him before, and at most, there had been 250 people on campus. I tell my friends that it kind of creeped me out that I've never seen him, but the one with the laptop said it was nothing to worry about, seeing there was campus security doing a checkup on a building near us. About 10 minutes go by, and he walks in front of us again. After he leaves, the friend with the laptop in a worried voice says, "We need to go." We grabbed all of our belongings and are walking fast back to the dorms, and I get her to explain to me what had her so worried. She said that when he walked by again, he looked over his shoulder and did a head nod into the distance. And when she looked over, she saw another man in the darkness. We laughed it off as we got close to the dorms, but all I could think to myself was, why didn't we leave when I said we should? Nobody ever listens to me even though I have great intuition. Anyways, creepy men who seemingly were planning on mugging us. Let's not meet. This happened around when I was 14 years old. My family ran a summer camp of sorts where we invited kids from Korea and China over to our house in the United States for a few months. We would go on tours of the country, showing them all the landmarks and famous attractions. One of the stops along our tour of the East Coast was the Smithsonian. The day we visited the Smithsonian, I was not feeling too great. The road and trip was long. I was packed in the back of my car with a bunch of strangers and had a nosebleed right before we had to step out of the car. Even though the Natural History Museum was my favorite place in the whole country, the combination of feeling sick made me want to get away. After speeding through the exhibits, I went to the bathroom for a bit to calm down. I didn't feel like walking, so I sat down in the rotunda with an elephant on it, waiting for my family and guests to finish up their tour. While I was sitting, a short woman sat next to me on the bench and started touching my shoulders. She began speaking to me in Korean, asking my name, my birthday, and a whole lot of other personal details. I was mostly confused and gave vague, short answers. The whole time, she was rubbing my shoulders and generally acting way too close. When I saw her face, she had a sad expression in her eyes. I didn't feel any malice, but it was still a very weird situation. Over time, I got more and more uncomfortable, and I stared straight at the ground, hoping my parents would hurry up. Eventually, she got up and left, and one of my guests showed up to tell me we were leaving soon. The more I thought about it afterward, the weirder it felt. I had been alone for several minutes by the time that she had showed up, so it was strange that she already knew that I spoke Korean. She also treated me like we were family, and left without a word. I don't think I was in a real danger due to being in full view of the crowd and cameras, but it's an unexplained experience that has stuck with me for years. Hi, thanks for watching the video. I really appreciate it. If you want to send me a story to read, feel free to do so. My email is in the description of the video, and if you want to follow me on my social media just to get updates or maybe to talk, the links and info for my Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram accounts are also in the description. And finally, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And turn that bell on to be notified for upcoming surprises. And remember, your fear feeds me.